He didn't even wait for my answer. Mark Collins, our golden boy CTO, zipped up his suit pants like nothing had happened, like the sweat on my skin was a footnote in his schedule. "Back to business, Rachel," he muttered, already reaching for his smartwatch, already scrolling through notifications like I was just another unread email. I lay there staring at the hotel ceiling, the plaster stained yellow in one corner, like someone had tried and failed to scrub guilt out of it. My throat was tight, but I refused to cry in front of him. Not again. The click of the door shutting was the only apology he ever gave me. Silence washed over the room, thin and cold like the AC finally finding my skin. That helped. I rolled onto my side, my eyes landing on the pillow he'd used, the hollow dent in the middle collapsing in on itself. It looked exactly like every promise he'd made over the last 6 years. Empty, temporary, something he could leave behind without even straightening the sheets. I thought of his words that morning, said with a laugh that cut deeper than any outright insult. I had asked for a raise. Just a raise, not a miracle, not a stock buyout, not even a promotion. 6 years of my life, 3 full product pivots, 40+ modules running in production, all stitched together by my hands. And he laughed, not cruelly, not even maliciously, just dismissively, as if the thought of me being compensated fairly was a punchline. "Come on, Rachel, you're essential. We all know that. But raises? That's a conversation for bigger picture thinkers." Bigger picture thinkers. He said that while tucking in his shirt, while brushing off lipstick that wasn't mine, while treating me like both indispensable and disposable in the same breath. I stared at my reflection in the black screen of the TV. My face was flushed. Eyes rimmed red, not from tears, but from rage that had nowhere to go. I had built this company's foundation with sleepless nights and cheap coffee in a rented studio that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. I had written the engine that made their investors clap, the architecture that their CEO paraded around like it was his personal legacy. And what had I gotten in return? Gaslighting performance reviews, promises that never survived past the next budget cycle, a seat in the shadows while men like Mark put their names on my diagrams and mispronounced acronyms I had invented. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, not for warmth, but for grounding. My mind replayed the last 6 years in jagged flashes. Whiteboards covered in my handwriting, hackathons that blurred into dawn, launch days where I carried the system on my back while executives toasted champagne. I was always there, always present, always the one fixing the cracks. And yet, in every glossy press release, every keynote slide deck, I was invisible. Maybe that's why his laugh cut so deep. It wasn't just about the raise. It was proof, undeniable, sharp, that he never saw me as anything more than a cog. An essential cog, sure, but replaceable all the same. Someone to squeeze dry, to lean on, to take from. The silence in that hotel room grew heavier. It pressed against my chest until I sat up, feet hitting the carpet. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment something shifted. That was the moment the bitterness began to solidify into something sharper. Because here's the thing about people like Mark. They mistake patience for weakness. They think endurance is submission. They don't notice when the cracks they've carved start forming into a blade. And me? I was done being his invisible scaffolding. I was done being laughed at while holding up the empire. That night, with the pillow still dented and the air still cold, I began to remember something I hadn't thought about in years. A folder. An old laptop. A decision I once made when nobody else was sober enough to care. I didn't know it yet, but I still had the match. And Mark had just handed me the gasoline. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the hotel room, not Mark's smug laugh, not even the raise that never was. What stuck like a thorn under my skin was the memory of something I had buried long ago. My insurance policy, hidden in plain sight. It came back to me in pieces. A conference in Denver, late 2019. Our so-called senior architect had passed out drunk in a beanbag chair, muttering between snores about how nobody at the company would bother filing patents until Q3. Legal was a graveyard, he'd said, slurring. Everyone laughed, clinked glasses, went back to complaining about sprint velocity. But I hadn't laughed. I went back to my Airbnb that night, stared at the ceiling until dawn, and then spent my entire Sunday on the USPTO website. Click by click, form by form, I documented every line of the load balancing engine I had spent 3 weeks of sleepless nights designing. My name, my diagrams, my notes, all of it filed under Rachel Monroe, sole inventor. Not the company, not Mark, just me. And then, like so many things, life got in the way. I shoved the digital receipt into a folder on my external hard drive labeled "Old Crap Don't Delete," told myself I'd done it just for peace of mind, and moved on. 6 years passed. 6 years of overnights, pivots, gaslit performance reviews, and Mark Collins taking bows on conference stages under spotlights powered by my code. Now, sitting in my apartment with the blinds half drawn, laptop glowing in the dark, I clicked open that forgotten folder. My pulse raced. There it was, U.S. Patent Number 10447XXX, Method for Dynamic Predictive Load Distribution in Asynchronous Modular Environments. Filed under my name, time-stamped, signed, untouched. My breath caught. For a moment, I thought the file might crumble if I touched it, like a relic too old to survive daylight. But when I opened the PDF, it was all there. My architecture, my flow diagrams, my words, my signature. I had sat on this secret for years, not because I was cunning or strategic, but because I was tired. Burnout had swallowed whole months of my life. There was a time I couldn't tell whether my depression was from code debt or the weight of being invisible. But now it wasn't just paperwork. It was a guillotine, and Mark's neck was already under it. I traced the lines of my own diagrams on the screen, remembering every sleepless night that had birthed them. The granola bars, the empty Red Bull cans, the dry erase markers that stained my fingertips. I had written half the encryption module with tears streaming down my face after a fight with the man I almost married. A DevSecOps guy who once asked me if I needed help understanding TLS certificates. As if I hadn't built the system that kept our data safe in the first place. That signature, that patent, that neglected little folder. They weren't just evidence. They were a weapon humming softly, waiting for the right moment. And now I could feel it in my bones. The moment had arrived. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let out a laugh I hadn't expected. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was sharper than both, edged with something dangerous. Mark thought I was crying over a raise. He had no idea I was about to burn the foundation out from under him. For 2 nights straight, I couldn't sleep. The patent file sat open on my screen like a loaded gun, daring me to pull the trigger. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Mark's voice in that smug, careless tone. "Come on, Rachel. Raises are for bigger picture thinkers." The words gnawed at me, sharper each replay. By the 3rd night, the decision was no longer a question. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to explain. I was going to take back what was mine. First, the evidence. I dug deep into my old drives, unearthed commit logs, Git histories, Jenkins pipelines with my username stamped on every critical change. I pulled emails where I'd written the architecture doc, where I'd argued for scaling solutions they later paraded as innovation. Each file was another nail for the coffin. Then came the prototype. I borrowed an AWS account from an old college friend, paid him in cash to avoid digital fingerprints, and spun up a private container. I renamed my laptop's host name to HP DeskJet, a little inside joke. If their spyware ever pinged it, they'd assume I was just another dusty printer in the office. For the first time in years, I coded like I was alive. Fingers flying, brain buzzing, no Slack pings, no performance reviews hovering over my shoulder. Just me and the machine, rebuilding the engine line by line. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had built this architecture once under exhaustion and fear, and now I was rebuilding it under anger and clarity. Every keystroke felt like striking a match. I routed traffic through Iceland, masked my IP with 3 layers of VPN. I wasn't naive. If they caught me too soon, they'd spin it as theft, sabotage, hysteria. But this wasn't theft. This was reclamation. This was setting the record straight in code. By Thursday, the system hummed. My system. Version 2.0. Cleaner, sharper, optimized with features I'd been forced to shelf when Mark dismissed them as scope creep. It wasn't just alive. It was thriving. I stared at the console output, watching green check marks line up like soldiers. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the thrill of control I hadn't felt in years. That's when the idea crystallized. I didn't need to expose them with a blog post or scream on social media or beg a court to listen. I needed a partner powerful enough to weaponize the truth. And across the street, literally across Market Street, was Orion Technologies. Their glass tower reflected our dingy little startup's office windows every morning like a cruel mirror. Competitors, rivals, predators. They had money, lawyers, influence, and most importantly, they had motive. The question wasn't if I would use the patent. The question was how loudly I wanted them to scream when it landed. I pushed back from my desk, staring at the glow of the city through my apartment blinds. San Francisco at midnight smelled like rain on metal, damp concrete, and ambition. Somewhere out there, Mark was probably asleep, dreaming of earnings calls and keynote spotlights. He thought I was still in the shadows. He thought he'd broken me. But I was done being invisible. I had the code. I had the patent. And now, I had a plan. Walking into Orion Technologies felt like stepping onto another planet. Their lobby was glass and chrome, polished within an inch of its life, the kind of place where even the air smelled like confidence and filtered water. My old office, by contrast, still had carpet stains from when someone spilled kombucha during a wellness week. I had rehearsed my pitch a dozen times in my head, but when the elevator doors slid open on the 9th floor, I realized it wasn't going to be a pitch at all. This wasn't a plea for help. This was a transaction. I had the one thing Orion wanted most, the weapon to cripple their rival. The woman waiting for me didn't waste time with small talk. Lena Ward, VP of Engineering. I'd seen her name on conference rosters, the kind of woman whose reputation preceded her. Sharp, no nonsense. The kind of leader who cut through excuses like a scalpel. Her hair was platinum blonde, pulled back so tightly it gleamed under the fluorescence. She gestured to a chair without a smile. "Rachel Monroe," she said flatly, scanning her tablet. "You asked for this meeting. You said you had something we'd want to see." I slid a flash drive across the table, careful not to flinch. "Not just something, everything." She raised a single eyebrow, plugged the drive into a secure port, and opened the folder. Patent documents, commit logs, DevOps pipelines, screenshots, my receipts. She scrolled fast. Too fast for anyone but an engineer who knew exactly what she was looking at. 5 minutes passed in silence, only the faint hum of the HVAC filling the space. Finally, Lena looked up, her gaze like a searchlight. "This patent's real?" "Filed under my name," I said. U.S. Patent Office, 2019, never assigned to the company. They've been running their entire orchestration stack on it for 6 years. Lena leaned back, tapping a stylus against her lips. No gasp. No dramatic reaction. Just calculation. You understand what you're handing me. This isn't just leverage. This is a warhead. They started the war, I replied, voice steadier than I expected. They just laughed too loud to hear the first shot. For the first time, a smirk tugged at her mouth. Poetic. Dangerous, but poetic. The next half hour blurred. Orion's legal team filed into the room like a silent army. Suits, binders, pens clicking in unison. They slapped NDAs on the table, pages thick enough to suffocate a small animal. I signed. Then they signed. Then the real conversation began. Licensing deal? Lena said, sliding a draft proposal across the glass. Exclusive rights. Orion becomes the primary licensor. You remain the patent holder. In exchange, we move forward with immediate legal action against your former employer. I scanned the terms. My name printed where it had never been before, front and center. I could almost feel the weight of it, heavier than any paycheck, steadier than any false promise Mark had ever dangled. Before we finalize, Lena added, I need proof of authorship beyond the filing. Source code. Time-stamped commits. Anything that ties this directly to you. I smiled, opening my laptop. Already prepared. Her eyes flicked over the logs. The Git history. The forensic trail I'd stitched together over 4 sleepless nights. When she looked up again, there was no skepticism left. Only certainty. You realize, she said, voice lower now, when this goes public, they won't just fight. They'll claw. They'll smear your name. They'll call you vindictive, unstable, disloyal. Are you ready for that? I thought of Mark's laugh, of 6 years of invisibility, of every keynote where my diagrams lit up behind his smug grin. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Lena's smile was thin, dangerous. Then let's light the fuse. The email went out at 7:32 a.m. on a Wednesday. Subject line, licensing violation and IP infringement. Action required. I didn't hit send myself. Orion's legal team did, with my name bolded in the header, my signature stamped clean at the bottom. Still, when I saw it in the sent folder, my pulse kicked like I'd just detonated something under their floorboards. I could almost picture it. Mark sitting at his desk, oat milk cortado in hand, scrolling through unread messages with that bored little smirk. Maybe he didn't even open it right away. Maybe he thought it was another vendor pitch or some analyst's noise. But I knew the exact second he read the words. Somewhere across the city, I bet he choked on foam and spit coffee across the product team. Because attached to that email was everything. The patent, the filing receipts, the forensic logs tying every line of code back to me. And Orion's demand, negotiate licensing terms within 48 hours or face legal action and platform-wide takedown notices. Within the hour, my old Slack login went dark. Calendar wiped, email locked, access revoked. But my phone lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. WTF is this? Rachel, call me right now. We can work this out. Please tell me you didn't send this. I know you're upset, but this is insane. Be rational. And finally, from Mark. You vindictive little brat. You have no idea what you've done. But I did. I knew exactly. For 6 years, they had gaslit me, squeezed me dry, stapled my work under their names, then laughed when I asked for recognition. This wasn't revenge. It was translation. My resignation letter, written in legalese. By noon, the first memo leaked. A senior engineer still on the inside forwarded it to me through Proton Mail. Subject line, Crisis Protocol, Monroe Fallout. Highlights included, Deactivate all blog posts referencing our proprietary engine. Purge Slack messages from 2019 to 2020 involving code attribution. Cancel Mark's panel appearance at DevCon. Too risky. Explore emergency countersuit, but confidence low. She has receipts. That last line. I read it 3 times, printed it, framed it, hung it above my coffee maker. On social media, silence. No official statement, but in the shadows, chaos was already spreading. I heard from a recruiter I barely remembered that my name was suddenly in circulation. VC firms were asking questions, tech journalists were sniffing. It was only a matter of time before the story broke wide open. And through it all, I stayed quiet. No tweets, no blog posts, no leaks from me. Just stillness. Because stillness, when timed right, is louder than a scream. I imagined Mark pacing his glass office, jaw tight, teams scrambling to scrub the internet of any trace of my authorship. I imagined the board asking pointed questions about why the cornerstone of their billion-dollar valuation belonged to a woman they'd never once listed on a press release. The fuse was lit, and all I had to do was wait for the first boom. It didn't take long. By Friday, Orion flipped the switch. My engine, version 2.1, cleaned, optimized, fortified with 3 features Mark once dismissed as unnecessary overhead, went live on their infrastructure. No gray areas, no misunderstandings. Fully licensed, fully proprietary, fully mine. And then the dominoes started to fall. That same morning, my old company hosted their Q2 earnings call. Live-streamed, open to journalists, investors, former employees who couldn't resist rubbernecking a slow-motion train wreck. I had 3 monitors glowing in my apartment, 2 shots of espresso lined up like ammunition, and my cat curled smugly beside me like he already knew the ending. At 9:01 a.m., the CEO's voice came through the stream, slick as Vaseline. We're excited to share another quarter of innovation and strategic growth. I muted him. My eyes were on the telemetry dashboard one of my former juniors had quietly slipped me access to. Root-level privileges, still unpatched, because of course security had never been their strong suit. At first, just a wobble. API latency ticked upward, then doubled. Login errors stacked. By 9:07, error logs painted the dashboard red, and then the hammer dropped. One of their biggest clients, a Fortune 100 name that made or broke their credibility, tweeted, "Thrilled to announce our migration to @Orion Tech. Lower latency, better security, smoother integration. Cheers to clean code." The tweet detonated like a grenade. Retweets, screenshots, benchmarks side by side. Developers gleefully comparing my architecture running at Orion against the duct-taped mess my old company was still trying to prop up. It was open season. By 9:14, the CTO's voice cut into the stream, tense, brittle. We're seeing temporary issues due to unexpected load. Our teams are addressing. And then he cut out mid-sentence because the system buckled again. I sipped my coffee and watched in silence as their stock ticker dipped. 11% by 10:12, frozen by 10:48. Trading halted before noon, and on Twitter, a hashtag climbed fast. Stolen code startup. That's when the journalists pounced. Tech blogs plastered side-by-side images, me in a hoodie at a hackathon, scribbling diagrams on a whiteboard, versus Mark strutting across a keynote stage with the same diagram behind him. My arrows, my shorthand, even my misspelling of balancer as Blancer. Receipts, live and in color. Investors demanded answers. Employees panicked. Internal memos leaked like sieves. One thread in particular made the rounds, supposedly from Mark himself. Who the hell authorized her patent? Why wasn't this caught? Response from their own legal counsel. You told us not to waste time on her, Mike. Mic drop. By mid-afternoon, resignation notices started popping up on LinkedIn. A senior engineer wrote, "As someone who watched Rachel carry this project through hell and gaslighting, I can't pretend anymore. I'm out." 3 more followed within hours. Meanwhile, Orion played their cards perfectly. Their legal team released a 14-page appendix, API logs, Jenkins pipelines, Jira tickets with my name on every breakthrough. They didn't just defend me, they buried my old company in evidence. On CNBC that evening, my former CEO appeared in a blazer one size too tight, sweat glistening under studio lights. He spoke words like miscommunication and legacy contributor, and my personal favorite, "We deeply value our engineers, past and present." The ticker below him scrolled the truth. Company stock down 18%. Investors question IP ownership. I muted the TV and leaned back in my chair, the glow of 3 screens washing over me. For the first time in 6 years, I felt it, a deep, steady exhale that didn't shake. The house of cards was collapsing, and I hadn't even touched it. I'd just lit the match and watched them burn themselves down. The board moved faster than I expected. By late Thursday night, a screenshot landed in my Proton mail, slipped from someone still inside the crumbling tower. Subject line: immediate termination. Reason: gross negligence. Reputational damage. Failure to disclose patent conflicts. Mark Collins was out. I read the thread 5 times, letting each word sink in. 6 years of watching him take bows on stages lit by my diagrams. 6 years of him brushing off my requests with laughter. 6 years of invisibility. It all collapsed into one quiet line on a board memo. Termination. For the first time in years, I exhaled without feeling my chest tighten. But relief came laced with something else. A reminder that people like Mark don't vanish. They mold, they regroup, they wait for the next stage where they can strut under someone else's spotlight. That reminder arrived 3 days later. An email hit my inbox. No subject line, no greeting. Just one sentence. "You really think this is over?" I stared at it, my jaw tightening. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. I could hear his voice behind every word. The arrogance, the refusal to accept consequence. Mark wasn't admitting defeat. He was promising a sequel. For a moment, doubt flickered. Was I ready for this to escalate further? Legal battles could drag for years. Smear campaigns could stain reputations beyond repair. And me? I had built everything on truth, on receipts, on patience finally snapping. But I was still just one person. But then I remembered the look on Lena's face when she saw the patent. The way Orion's legal team filed motions like they were cutting arteries, the interns at Orion whispering that I was the reason they'd applied. I wasn't alone anymore. If Mark wanted another war, he'd have to fight me on a battlefield I'd already claimed. And this time, I wouldn't be the one in the shadows. I closed the email without replying. No threats, no denial, no fuel, just silence. Because sometimes silence is the sharpest answer. Mark did exactly what I knew he would. He resurfaced. Not at my old company. They'd scrubbed his name from their website within 24 hours of the termination memo, but in the arms of a mid-tier VC firm itching for blood. They branded him a visionary in exile, a genius unfairly scapegoated by panicked executives. It was laughable, but Silicon Valley has always loved a comeback story, especially one with sharp elbows. Within weeks, a press release dropped. His new startup, cobbled together overnight with borrowed engineers and second-hand ambition, announced a next-generation load distribution engine built from the ground up. I almost choked on my coffee when I read that phrase. Built from the ground up? The architecture was suspiciously familiar. Too familiar. It carried my fingerprints, my patterns, my skeleton. dressed up in sloppy UI and buzzwords. They even dared to quote him. Finally, a product that doesn't rely on stolen foundations. The irony nearly split me in half. But I didn't rage. I didn't shout. I didn't post a single word online. I just went back to Orion's offices, sat down across from Lena, and slid my laptop open. Version 3.0, I said. Her eyes flicked over the console logs, benchmarks, graphs shaped like middle fingers to anyone who doubted. This wasn't just an engine anymore. It was a monster, faster, leaner, adaptive in ways the old architecture couldn't touch. I had built it in the quiet after the storm, fueled not by rage anymore, but by clarity. We called it EdgeStream. The rollout was surgical. Orion's sales team lined up Mark's shiny new clients like dominoes and offered them early access to EdgeStream. Every single one bit. By the end of the month, 8 of his 12 contracts had quietly migrated. No headlines, no drama, just silence. The kind that eats revenue alive. And then the funding dried up. The VC firm that had backed him issued a terse statement about realigning priorities. Investors vanished. Demo videos crashed mid-click. Screens froze on live streams while engineers in the background scrambled like ants in floodwater. It was over before it even began. I watched it unfold from my apartment window, the lights of San Francisco glittering like sparks over a battlefield. No VPNs, no secret logins this time. I didn't need sabotage. I had momentum. I had a team. And most of all, I had truth. Carved into the patent filings and printed on the homepage of Orion's product site. Mark thought he was waging a war. But what he never understood is that you can't fight someone who already set the rules of the game. By the end of the quarter, his company was nothing but a rumor. And me? I was just getting started. The tech gala was one of those events where the air itself smelled expensive. Polished marble, overpriced whiskey, too many cameras flashing against too much light. Orion's banners draped every wall. EdgeStream's logo looping on giant screens while waiters in black ties floated between clusters of investors. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, my stomach hummed with the kind of anticipation that comes right before a storm. That's when I saw him. Mark Collins, former CTO, former golden boy, reduced now to a man with a brittle smile and a drink sweating in his hand. He spotted me across the room, and for a moment I thought he might turn away. But arrogance is a stubborn disease. He walked straight toward me. "Rachel," he said, voice syrupy, like we were old friends catching up. "You win." I tilted my head, studying him. The lines around his eyes had deepened, his jaw slackened with the weight of defeat. He was trying to pass it off as grace, but his fingers clenched the glass too tightly. "This wasn't a game," I replied evenly. He glanced around the room, eyes darting to the Orion logo glowing above us, to the investors shaking hands under banners of my design. "I made a mistake back then," he muttered, almost too quiet to hear. "I should have taken you seriously." I sipped my drink slowly, letting the pause stretch, letting the cameras keep flashing around us. "You didn't make a mistake," I said finally. "You made a decision, and so did I." For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. His mouth opened, then closed, words strangled by the truth. But someone else filled the silence. One of our newest engineers, barely out of grad school, face still raw with youth, stood nearby, watching us. He raised his voice just enough to carry. "Hey, Rachel, is this the guy who laughed at your raise request?" Heads turned, investors, colleagues, even a few journalists. Mark flinched, shoulders folding inward as if the question itself had struck him. He muttered something under his breath and turned away, disappearing into the crowd alone. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. 10 minutes later, I stood on stage, the spotlight sharp and hot. A sea of faces staring up at me. 2,000 people, all waiting. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I told the story. Not of revenge, not even of victory, but of reclamation. Of building something undeniably yours and watching the world scramble to catch up. I spoke about how silence is mistaken for weakness, how endurance is mistaken for compliance, and how one signature on one forgotten Sunday could rewrite the entire balance of power. When I finished, the applause was loud enough to rattle the chandeliers. But louder still was the quiet in my chest. The steady calm of knowing I had taken back everything they tried to erase. And Mark? He was just another ghost in the room, fading into the background while the future carried my name. The collapse of my old company didn't make headlines in one single blow. It bled out slowly, week by week, until there was nothing left but silence. Investors fled first, pulling funding with carefully worded statements about uncertain legal exposure. Then the clients followed, migrating to Orion in a steady stream, lured not by marketing, but by numbers, by graphs that didn't lie. By the end of the quarter, their website footer no longer boasted about proprietary technology. The line was gone, scrubbed clean like a confession whispered too late. Their CEO, once a man who strutted on CNBC panels with practiced charm, quietly resigned. The press called it a personal decision. Everyone inside knew it was survival. Meanwhile, Orion surged. EdgeStream wasn't just another product, it was the product, clean, fast, scalable. My name sat in bold on the patent, the documentation, even the homepage. For the first time, I wasn't hidden in the acknowledgments or buried under team contributions. I was credited, openly, undeniably, and people noticed. Journalists wrote profiles, not about vengeance, but about resilience. Students reached out on LinkedIn, saying they applied to Orion because they wanted to work under someone who had fought back, who had proved that exploitation wasn't inevitable. A handful of old colleagues, ones who had once stayed silent while Mark took the spotlight, sent hesitant messages, apologies threaded between excuses. I read them, then archived them. Some bridges don't need rebuilding. But the interns, they were different. They cornered me after long sprints, wide-eyed, telling me they'd read every leaked memo, every blog post, every clipped headline. "You prove they can't just take from us," one of them said. His voice cracked with the kind of conviction I'd lost years ago. I didn't cry. Not there. But later, in the dark of my apartment, I looked at the old HP DeskJet laptop that had carried the secret all these years. Stickers peeling, edges dented, the screen scarred with tea stains. That machine had started the fire, and I had finally lit the match. What surprised me most wasn't the collapse of the company that betrayed me. It wasn't even the recognition. It was the simple, startling fact that people wanted to work for me, not tolerate me, not talk over me, not smile while stealing my slides. They wanted to collaborate, to build, to give credit where it was due. That, I realized, was the real legacy. Not the stock dips, not the hashtags, not even Mark's eventual silence. It was the shift in the room. The whisper to every woman in tech who'd ever been told to wait her turn, to swallow her anger, to stay invisible. I had been invisible for 6 years, and now, invisibility was no longer an option. A week after the gala, I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights flickering against the window like sparks that refused to die. On my desk, the old HP DeskJet laptop sat closed, battered and small, but heavier to me than any award or paycheck. I traced a finger along its dented cover and thought about the girl I had been when I first filed that patent. Exhausted, invisible, clinging to hope that maybe, someday, It would matter. It mattered. Mark had vanished from the headlines, as men like him always do. No grand apology, no accountability, just silence. Maybe he'd reinvent himself again in another corner of the industry, whispering to venture capitalists about vision and strategy. Maybe he'd fade into consultancy, selling the illusion of brilliance to anyone who hadn't read the fine print. But it no longer concerned me. His story had burned out. Mine had only just begun. The truth is, revenge wasn't the point. It never was. Revenge is reactive, fleeting. What I wanted, what I finally claimed, was reclamation. My work, my voice, my name. At Orion, we were building something that would outlast headlines. A product born clean, credited properly, shared without theft or gaslighting. A team that understood collaboration didn't mean erasure. Watching it come alive was better than revenge. It was proof. One night, after a long sprint, I found myself in the break room with two interns. They were still buzzing from the launch, eyes wide, words tumbling over each other. One of them hesitated, then said, "We read about what happened, about the patent, about them." He looked down, then back at me, and added quietly, "You're why we're here." I couldn't answer right away. My throat closed, not with rage this time, but with something softer, heavier. Gratitude. Responsibility. Later, as I lay awake, I thought about how close I had come to letting it all slide, to burying that folder forever, to accepting invisibility as the cost of survival. And I thought about every other engineer, every other woman standing on the edge of that same choice. So if they asked me what I'd learned, what I'd tell anyone who feels erased, I'd keep it simple. File the patent, then light the match.